The morning my brother tried to bury me in $78,000 of debt, he wore the same navy sweater our father had given him at Christmas. That's the detail I keep coming back to. Not the forged signature. Not the way his voice cracked when he said, "You have to help Mara. They're going to lose the house." The sweater. Because it meant he'd planned this the way he planned everything else in our family. Dressed like a good son. Sounding like a good son. While the paperwork on the kitchen table had my name on lines I'd never signed. I remember setting my coffee down very carefully. I remember my mother refusing to look up from her tea. I remember my father staring at the wallpaper behind me as if the answer were printed there. And I remember thinking, with a calm that surprised even me, that my brother had made exactly one miscalculation in his entire life, and he had made it that afternoon. He had forgotten what I did for a living. My name is Mara Ellenson. I'm 34 years old. I live in a small brick house in Beaver Creek, Ohio. And for the last 9 years, I've been a senior forensic accountant at a mid-sized firm in Dayton that mostly handles fraud reviews for regional banks and family-owned businesses. It is not glamorous work. It is quiet, obsessive, patient work. I spend my days looking at columns of numbers until the lies inside them start to hum. My brother, Cole, is 31, sells commercial insurance, and has always believed that being charming is the same thing as being smart. Those two beliefs are about to become very important to this story. If you've ever had a sibling who is always forgiven for the things you'd be crucified for, stay with me. This one is for you. The paperwork on the kitchen table that afternoon was a personal loan consolidation agreement from a lender I'd never heard of. A mid-tier online outfit that specialized in what they politely called family debt restructuring. $78,420. Co-signed, apparently by me. The signature was a decent forgery. Cole had always been able to imitate my handwriting. He used to sign my report cards in high school when our parents were too tired to check. What he had not imitated was the middle initial. I don't use one. The signature had a looping J tucked between Mara and Ellenson because somewhere in the last decade, in some family document Cole had once glanced at, he had confused my name with our aunt's. That J was the first thing I noticed. The second thing I noticed was that my mother already knew. Let me back up. Our family, from the outside, looks like a Christmas card that got a little wrinkled in the mail. Dad, Wallace, is a retired middle school principal who spent 40 years being loved by other people's children and had almost nothing left for his own by the time he came home each night. Mom, Diane, taught piano lessons out of the front room until her hands started to hurt too much. And then she stopped teaching but never stopped acting like the house was a place where students might arrive at any moment, meaning it was always tidy and always tense. Cole was the golden one. I was the reliable one. If you understand those two words, you already understand 30 years of my life. Cole got the trip to Spain in high school. I got the summer job to help pay for it. Cole got the car for graduation. I got a lecture about how a used Corolla builds character. Cole got the wedding 3 years ago at a vineyard outside Cincinnati that cost more than my down payment. I got a seat in the third row and a bridesmaid dress I paid for myself because his wife's family wanted everything to match. I didn't resent any of it, or I told myself I didn't, which is not the same thing but felt close enough to get through the holidays. What I did resent, quietly, was the money. Starting when I was about 26, my parents began to have what my mother called little stretches. A stretch was a month where the property taxes came due at the same time as the water heater died. A stretch was Dad's back surgery that insurance covered less than expected. A stretch was Cole's wedding, which somehow ended up partly on my parents' credit card, even though Cole's in-laws were supposed to split it. Each stretch, my mother would call me, always on a Sunday, always after she'd already talked to Cole and been told he was between commissions. Each stretch, I would transfer something, $2,000, $3,500. Once, $8,000 when Dad's car needed a transmission and Mom cried on the phone in a way she'd never cried before. Over 8 years, I had sent my parents roughly $91,000. I know the exact number because I am, again, an accountant, and I kept a spreadsheet I never showed anyone. Not because I planned to collect, but because tracking it was the only way I could stop myself from feeling used. If I could see it, I could tell myself it was a choice. Cole, in those same 8 years, had sent them nothing. Not because he didn't have it, though he claimed he didn't. Because it never occurred to him that he should. In our family, I was the account. He was the son. The trigger, the thing that finally cracked the surface, was a phone call from my mother in early March. She said the word second mortgage in a voice that was trying to sound casual and failing. She said Cole was helping them look into options. She said not to worry. She said it 3 times, which is how I knew to worry. I drove out to Springfield that weekend. My parents still live in the house I grew up in, a 2-story colonial with a crooked mailbox and a maple tree in the front yard that my father planted the year I was born. Cole's SUV was in the driveway when I pulled up, which was unusual for a Saturday morning. He lived 40 minutes away and rarely came over unless there was food involved or a favor to ask. Inside, the 3 of them were at the kitchen table. Papers, coffee, the particular silence of a conversation that had stopped the moment they heard my car. "Mara," my mother said, too brightly, "we were just talking about you." Cole stood up and hugged me, which he never did. He smelled like the cologne his wife had bought him for his birthday, the one he only wore to client meetings. He said, "I'm so glad you're here. We have to figure this out as a family." That was the first sentence that made my stomach turn. In our family, figure this out as a family had always meant Mara pays. He walked me through it slowly, the way you'd explain something to a child who might get upset. Our parents were behind. Not just a stretch this time. Behind on the mortgage, behind on 2 credit cards, behind on a home equity line I hadn't even known existed. The total, he said, was around $78,000. He had found a lender who would consolidate everything into one manageable monthly payment, but the lender wanted a co-signer with a stable income and good credit, someone the bank would take seriously. "You," he said, with the smile he used on clients. "You'd be saving them, Ma. You'd be saving all of us." I asked why he wasn't co-signing. He said his debt to income was already high because of the mortgage on his and Bethany's new house. I asked why our parents couldn't refinance directly. He said their credit had been damaged by the missed payments. I asked how the payments had gotten missed in the first place, since I'd been sending money every few months for years. That was the first crack. He said, "Well, that's what we need to talk about." He didn't talk about it. He slid the papers toward me. He said the lender needed a decision by Monday. He said the interest rate was locked. He said Mom and Dad could lose the house. He said all the things he had clearly rehearsed on the drive over. I told him I needed to read everything first. He said of course. He said he'd already filled in most of my information to save me time. He said the signature line was on page 4. I took the folder home with me that night. I told him I'd bring it back Sunday. He hugged me again at the door and said, "I knew we could count on you." My mother didn't get up from her chair. My father walked me to my car and said, "Your brother is trying his best, honey," which was, in retrospect, the most honest sentence any of them said to me that entire weekend. I stayed up until 3 in the morning going through the folder. Here is what I found, and I want you to understand that I found it not because I'm some kind of genius, but because I do this every single day for a living. And my brother had assumed I would look at the paperwork the way our parents looked at paperwork, which is to say, not at all. The loan was not a consolidation. It was structured as a personal loan in my name, with our parents listed as beneficiaries of the disbursement. In plain English, that meant the $78,000 would go into an account that Cole had listed as the family disbursement account, and I would be legally responsible for every penny of the repayment. The interest rate was not the manageable rate Cole had described. It was 19.4%, which is not a family rate. That is a rate you get when the lender knows something is off and prices in the risk. The family disbursement account was not my parents' checking account. It was a routing number I didn't recognize. I ran it through a database I have access to at work. It matched a business account for something called Beacon Ridge Advisors LLC, registered in Delaware 6 months earlier. The registered agent was a service company, but the LLC's Ohio filing, which is public, listed one member, Cole Ellenson. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time after I found that. My coffee got cold. My hands did not shake, which surprised me. I think part of me had known for years that something like this was possible, and finding it was less like a shock and more like finally hearing a sound I'd been straining to identify. I want to be honest about something. My first instinct was not to expose him. My first instinct was to protect my mother. I thought about calling Cole. I thought about giving him a chance to explain. I thought maybe there was some reading of this where Beacon Ridge Advisors was a legitimate vehicle he'd set up to help our parents. Some tax structure I wasn't seeing. some reason a 31-year-old commercial insurance salesman would need a Delaware LLC to receive a loan on his sister's credit. I sat with that possibility for about 20 minutes. Then I opened my laptop and started building a file. Because here is the thing about being the reliable one for 30 years. You get very, very good at documentation. Over the next 4 days, I did what I do at work, but for my own family. I pulled every transfer I'd ever made to my parents, categorized by date and stated purpose. I pulled the memo lines. I found the $8,000 for Dad's transmission, which had gone through 3 days before Cole had put a down payment on a boat he later sold. I found the $3,500 for Mom's dental emergency that had arrived in her account the same afternoon Cole's credit card had been paid off in a single lump sum from an account ending in the same 4 digits. I couldn't prove she'd forwarded my money to him, but the pattern was there, month after month, year after year, my transfers arriving and being followed within hours by outflows that lined up almost exactly. I pulled the state business filing for Beacon Ridge Advisors. I saved screenshots of everything because business filings can be amended. I requested through a legitimate channel at work a soft credit inquiry on myself to see what accounts had been opened in my name in the last 12 months. There were 2 I did not recognize. One was a store card at a home goods chain I had never entered. The other was a small line of credit at a credit union in Kentucky. Both had been opened within the last 8 months. Both had been paid on time, which was how they had stayed invisible to me. Someone had been carefully feeding them just enough to keep them from generating alerts. I froze my credit that night. I filed identity theft reports for the 2 accounts I could confirm. I did not tell my family. On Sunday, I drove back to Springfield with the folder. Cole was already there. So was Bethany, which was unusual. She sat at the far end of the table in a cream sweater, scrolling her phone, occasionally glancing up with an expression I could not read. My mother had made a coffee cake. My father was wearing a tie, indoors. On a Sunday, which meant he was nervous. "Well?" Cole said when I sat down. "Ready to save the day?" I put the folder on the table. I said I had some questions before I signed anything. His face didn't change, but I saw his hand move, just a small motion, adjusting his coffee cup. Cole has always had a tell. When he's about to lie, he touches whatever is nearest to his right hand. I asked him about the disbursement account. I asked him why the routing number didn't match my parents' bank. He said the lender required an intermediary account for processing. I asked him what an intermediary account was. He said it was a technical thing, boring, not worth getting into. I asked him if Beacon Ridge Advisors was the intermediary. His hand touched the coffee cup again. "How do you know that name?" he said. Not a question, a statement. My mother looked up for the first time. My father set his hands flat on the table. I said I knew the name because it was on the paperwork he had asked me to sign. Which was true, technically. It was on page 7, in the fine print, listed as the receiving entity. He had bet that I wouldn't read past page 4. He recovered fast. He said Beacon Ridge was a consulting entity he used for tax purposes. He said it was totally normal. He said his accountant had recommended it. I asked which accountant. He said a name I didn't recognize. I asked for a number. He said he'd have to look it up. Bethany put her phone down. That was the moment I realized she didn't know. Whatever Cole had told her about this weekend, it had not included the words forged or cosigner or my sister's credit. She was looking at him the way you look at a stranger who has just started speaking your language with an accent you didn't know they had. I opened the folder. I turned to page 4. I pointed at the signature. "That's not my signature," I said. The room went very quiet. My mother said softly, "Mara, don't." I looked at her. I said, "Mom, did you know?" She didn't answer. She looked at her hands. That was the second answer I got that afternoon. The first was Cole's hand on the coffee cup. The second was my mother's silence. In 8 years, my mother had never once told me no. Not when I sent money. Not when I asked what it was for. Not when I gently, once, suggested that Cole could help. Her silence at that kitchen table was not the silence of someone who didn't know. It was the silence of someone who had hoped I would sign the paper before I found out. I want to tell you I stayed calm. Mostly I did. But there was a moment, right then, where I almost got up and walked out and let the whole thing collapse behind me. I almost said, fine. Take the house, take the loan, take whatever you were going to take. I'm done. That would have been the easy version of this story. The version where I choose myself by disappearing. I didn't do that. Not because I was noble, because I knew if I walked away, Cole would submit the paperwork anyway, with a slightly better forgery next time, and I would spend the next 7 years fighting a debt that wasn't mine, while my credit collapsed and my career, which requires a clean financial background, quietly ended. He had already opened 2 accounts in my name. He was not going to stop. So I sat back down. I said, I brought a few other things I want to talk about. I took out the second folder. I laid out the accounts I hadn't opened. I laid out the transfer patterns, the dates, the amounts, the outflows from my parents' account within hours of my deposits. I laid out the filing for Beacon Ridge Advisors, with Cole's name on it, notarized and stamped and public. I laid out the credit report I had pulled on myself. I laid it all out the way I would lay out a case file at work, calmly, without commentary, letting the papers do the talking. My father put his glasses on. He read for a long time. When he looked up, he was not looking at me. He was looking at Cole. Son, he said. His voice was very tired. What is this? Cole did what Cole always does when cornered. He got bigger. He stood up. He said I was making this into something it wasn't. He said the LLC was for business, unrelated. He said the accounts were probably fraud from some data breach, not him. He said I was, and I want to give you his exact word because I've thought about it a lot since. Unstable. He said I had always been jealous of him. He said I was trying to blow up the family because I couldn't stand that he had a wife and a house and I didn't. Bethany stood up. She said his name once. Then she said, I'm going to wait in the car. She took her keys and left. The screen door slapped behind her. My mother started crying. Not loudly. Just the kind of quiet crying that has been held in for a long time. She said, I told him not to put your name on it. I told him. I said, Mom, how long? She said, the store card was mine. The room shifted. It actually physically shifted, the way a room does when something you thought was one shape turns out to be another. She had opened the home goods card 2 years ago, in my name, because her own credit was too damaged and she wanted new curtains and a chair for the living room, and she had told herself she would pay it off before I noticed. She had paid it off, mostly, from money I'd been sending her for other things. Cole had found out about it 8 months ago, and Cole, being Cole, had seen not a mistake but a template. The credit union line in Kentucky was his. The loan on the table was his. The Beacon Ridge Advisors account was his. He had used our mother's small, shameful secret as permission to build something much larger, and he had counted on the fact that if I ever found out, I would blame her enough to protect him. He had counted on me being the reliable one, on me choosing the family over the truth, on me swallowing it, the way I had swallowed everything else. Because if I didn't, the whole structure would come down, and I would be the one who brought it down. I looked at my mother. I said, I'm not angry about the curtains, Mom. I looked at Cole. I said, I need you to sit down. He didn't. He said he was leaving. He said he didn't need to listen to this. He said I'd be hearing from his lawyer, which was such a ridiculous thing to say that even my father made a small sound, almost a laugh, in his throat. I said, Cole, sit down, because if you walk out that door, the next conversation you have about this is not with me. It's with the lender's fraud department, and then it's with the state, because Beacon Ridge Advisors received funds from at least one account opened in my name without my consent, and that is not a family disagreement. That is a filing. He sat down. I did not enjoy that as much as I thought I would. I want to be honest about that too. There is a version of the story where I felt triumphant. In real life, I felt sick. He was still my brother. He was still the kid who had shared a bathroom with me for 18 years, who had cried at our grandmother's funeral into my shoulder because he didn't want anyone to see, who had once, when I was 12 and got my period at a school dance, quietly walked me home without saying a single word about it. I gave him a choice. I want you to understand that I gave him a choice because later, when he told the rest of the family what happened, he left this part out. I said the loan paperwork would be shredded in front of me that afternoon. I said the Kentucky line of credit would be closed by the end of the month, with him paying it off in full. from whatever he had to sell to do it. I said Beacon Ridge Advisors would be dissolved and I would be receiving a copy of the dissolution filing. I said he would not contact our parents about money for 1 full year. Not to lend, not to borrow, not to advise. I said if he did all of that, I would not file anything. I said if he didn't, I would. He stared at me for a long time. Then he said, very quietly, "You'd really do that to your own brother." I said, "You already did it to your own sister." He left. Bethany's car was still in the driveway. I heard them argue in the front seat for about 10 minutes before she drove away and he walked back inside and sat on the porch step until it got dark. My parents and I stayed at the kitchen table. I want to tell you we had some big healing conversation. We didn't. My father cried, which I had seen exactly twice in my life before that day. My mother apologized in a way that felt real and also in a way that I could tell was mostly about her own shame, rather than about what she had done to me. I let both of those things be true at the same time. That is one of the things you learn, I think, when you stop being the reliable one. You stop needing other people's apologies to be perfectly shaped before you accept them. I told my mother the money had to stop, not the help necessarily, but the pattern. I told her I would sit with her and Dad and go through every bill, every account, every recurring charge, and we would build an actual budget. And if there was still a gap after that, we would talk about it as adults, not as a rescue. She agreed. My father agreed. Whether they would stick to it was a separate question, and one I could not answer for them. I drove home that night with the folder on the passenger seat. I stopped at a rest area outside Xenia and just sat in the car for a while, watching truckers walk in and out of the vending area, and I thought about how many people were driving past me at that moment, carrying some version of the same weight. A brother, a mother, a house. A signature that wasn't theirs. Cole did what I asked him to do mostly. The loan application was withdrawn. The Kentucky line was paid off, slowly, over about 5 months, by him selling the boat he had bought with my transmission money and taking a second job on weekends that Bethany, I later learned, had insisted on. Beacon Ridge Advisors was dissolved. He sent me the filing. He did not include a note. He also, and this part I did not expect, told the extended family a version of the story in which I had threatened him and accused Mom of theft and brought lawyers into a family matter. I had brought no lawyers. I had made no accusations against my mother that weren't true. But the story spread the way stories in families spread, through phone calls and holiday dinners and the sort of aunts who preface everything with, "I'm not taking sides," but my Aunt Judith called me and told me I had been very hard on your brother. My cousin Peter, who I had always liked, stopped responding to my texts. At Thanksgiving that year, I was not invited to my parents' house. My mother called me the day before, crying, and said Cole had said he wouldn't come if I was there, and she just couldn't do another holiday without him. I said okay, I meant it. I spent Thanksgiving with my friend Renee and her husband and their 2 kids in a small apartment in Kettering, and we ate a turkey that was slightly overcooked, and I laughed more that day than I had laughed in a year. Bethany left Cole about 8 months after the kitchen table. Not because of me, I don't think. Because of everything the kitchen table had shown her about the person she had married. She sent me a card once, just a short one, that said, "I'm sorry I sat there and didn't ask any questions. I should have asked questions. I keep it in the drawer next to my passport. I don't know exactly why. My father had a small stroke the following spring. Nothing catastrophic. He recovered most of what he lost. When I visited him in the hospital, Cole was in the parking lot, and we passed each other on the sidewalk without speaking. He looked older. He looked tired. I did not feel triumphant about that either. I felt, mostly, the way you feel when you drive past a house you used to live in and see that the new owners have painted it a color you would not have chosen. My mother and I are slowly building something, not what we had, something more honest and, in some ways, smaller. We talk on the phone on Sundays. She does not ask me for money. When she needs help, she tells me what she needs, specifically, and I decide specifically whether I can give it. Sometimes I can, sometimes I can't. She has learned, I think, that no from me is not the end of her life, and I have learned that yes from me is not the price of her love. I still keep the spreadsheet. I don't add to it anymore. I keep it because sometimes, late at night, I open it and look at the numbers and remind myself that I was not crazy, that the pattern was real, that being the reliable one is a job someone gives you, and you can, if you decide to, quit. People ask me sometimes, when the story comes up, whether I regret not filing charges, whether I should have gone all the way, whether letting Cole off with a dissolution filing and a year of silence was too soft. Here is what I think, now, almost 2 years later. Justice is not always the biggest hammer you can swing. Sometimes justice is the smallest, most precise cut you can make, the one that severs the thing that was hurting you without taking your own hand off in the process. Cole did not go to jail. He did not lose everything. He lost his marriage, eventually, but that was his own doing, not mine. What he lost, because of me, was access. He lost the ability to reach into my life and pull out whatever he needed. He lost the assumption that I would always sign. He lost the sister who could be counted on to swallow the truth for the sake of the table. That was enough. That is, I have come to believe actually the most any of us can win against the people who were supposed to love us and chose to use us instead. Not their ruin, our exit. He forgot I was the accountant. But that was not really his mistake. His mistake was much older. His mistake was thinking that being the reliable one meant I would never learn to count what it was costing me. If any part of this sounded like your family, I'm sorry. And also, you're not crazy. And also, the spreadsheet in your head is real, and you're allowed to close it whenever you're ready. If you made it this far, thank you for sitting at the table with me. It's a lot easier to tell it once you know someone was listening.